The buzzing of fluorescent lights was the loudest sound in the room, a testament to how much the universe really cared about human silence. Commander Jareth Rook rubbed his temples with the fervor of a man searching for a misplaced moral compass. "Why do I feel like I'm babysitting a grenade with Ad?" he muttered to no one in particular. The room, an uninspired blend of steel and gloom, was the nerve center of Earth's most secretive research base, tucked away in the cosmic armpit of the galaxy. Thick cables snaked across the floor like metallic intestines. The walls, adorned with screens displaying scrolling data, seemed to mock anyone who dared to look for meaning in the numbers. Dr. Tessa Voss, head of Biotech and renowned cynic, leaned against the nearest console. Her lab coat was as stained and crumpled as her patient's. "I'm just saying, Rook, if they wanted peace negotiations, they should have called someone who gives a damn." She flicked a switch on a console more out of habit than necessity. Rook snorted. "Peace negotiations with aliens demanding to inspect our tech? Yeah, sure. And maybe next they'll want to know how we make toast." A low hum indicated an incoming transmission, and Rook's expression soured. "Let's hear what the intergalactic inspectors have to say." The holographic display in the center flickered to life, showing the alien delegation. They looked like a cross between a squid and a kaleidoscope, all tentacles and shifting colors. Rook had seen less intimidating things in his sock drawer. "Greetings, Earth Commander," the lead alien said, its voice a mix of arrogance and echo. "We are the Ixaliant delegation. We require immediate access to your technological advancements." Rook crossed his arms, a sarcastic grin playing on his lips. "Immediate access? Sorry, we usually reserve that for beings who don't resemble deep-sea nightmares, Doctor." Voss raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "What exactly are you hoping to find?" "Our latest cat videos. The secret to human sarcasm." The alien's colors shifted, maybe a blush, maybe just indigestion. "We are interested in your biotech capabilities." "They are concerning." Rook laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. "Concerning. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about our work. Usually it's more like terrifying or how did you even come up with this mess?" Voss leaned in, eyes narrowed. "What makes you think we just hand over our hard-earned secrets? We're a secretive bunch like raccoons with PhDs." The alien's tentacles writhed, possibly a sign of frustration, or it just had an itch. "We insist on an inspection. Failure to comply may lead to consequences." Rook rolled his eyes. "Consequences? I've been threatened by worse. My last girlfriend, for example." Voss chuckled. "Remember, Rook, they're not here to negotiate. They're here to steal, like interstellar magpies with a tech fetish." The room fell silent, the hum of the equipment a backdrop to the tension. Rook knew this was no time for jokes, but against a backdrop of cosmic uncertainty, humor was his only armor. "Fine," Rook said, sighing with the resignation of a man signing up for a colonoscopy. "We'll give you a tour of our facilities. But don't be surprised if you leave with more questions than answers." The alien delegation paused, colors shifting in a way that suggested they were either plotting or deeply offended. "We accept your terms, Earth Commander." The transmission ended, leaving Rook and Voss in the dim glow of the control room. Voss shook her head. "Think they'll figure out we're just as clueless as they are?" Rook shrugged. "Doesn't matter. The secret to getting away with anything is making sure you're the last to know what the hell's going on." Voss smirked, pushing herself off the console. "Then let's make sure we give them the most convoluted tour possible. Maybe we'll lose them in the janitor's closet." As they prepared for the alien delegation's visit, Rook couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be one of those days. The kind where you wake up with optimism and go to bed counting your regrets. The corridors of the research base were a maze of metal and monotony, designed by someone who clearly hated sunshine and happiness. As they walked, Rook and Voss exchanged banter like old gunslingers trading shots. "You think they'll appreciate our decor?" Rook asked, gesturing at the bland walls. Voss shrugged. "If they don't, we can always blame it on minimalism, or a shortage of budget." They reached the entrance where a team of scientists gathered, faces a mix of curiosity and fear. Doctor. Alan, the resident xenobiologist and part-time pessimist, approached. Commander, are we seriously letting them in? Alan's voice was as tight as his collar. Rook nodded. Not like we've got much choice, Alan. Unless you want to be the galaxy's newest pile of ash. Doctor. Alan grimaced. I'd rather not. Ash is terrible for the skin. With a hiss, the airlock doors opened and the Ixaliant delegation glided in. Rook offered a smile that could best be described as begrudgingly diplomatic. Welcome to our humble abode, Rook said, motioning grandly. Please enjoy our limited hospitality and our even more limited patience. The lead alien tilted its head, tentacles waving in what might have been a nod. We appreciate your cooperation. Voss gestured towards a hallway. This way to our labs. Feel free to ask questions, but if the answer involves anything classified, I'll just blink at you awkwardly. The tour began, a parade of uncomfortable silences and awkward explanations. The labs, filled with the hum of machinery and the faint scent of desperation, were a testament to humanity's relentless pursuit of, let's see what happens if we do this. The aliens examined each display with a focus that bordered on obsession. Rook couldn't help but chuckle at their intensity. You know, if you stare any harder, the equipment might start blushing. The lead alien turned, colors shifting slightly. We must understand your advancements. They are impressive. Rook shrugged, the universal gesture of we're just winging it. We like to think of it as throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing if it sticks. Except the spaghetti's alive and might explode. Voss pointed to a piece of equipment humming quietly in the corner. That's our gene splicer. We call it the why not machine because, well, why not? The alien delegation paused, tentacles quivering. Rook sensed their hesitation, their curiosity mingling with unease. It was a feeling he was intimately familiar with. As the tour dragged on, the tension in the air grew thicker than a politician's promises. Rook could feel the eyes of his team on him, waiting for any sign of how this powder keg might explode. The lead alien finally broke the silence. Your work is fascinating, but we must know if it poses a threat to our kind. Rook sighed, running a hand through his hair. Threat is such a strong word. We prefer creative problem solving. Voss nodded. Besides, we're more of a threat to ourselves than to anyone else. Just ask Dr. Allen about his lab safety record, Doctor. Allen winced, mumbling something about unfortunate incidents and misunderstood experiments. The aliens exchanged glances, a silent communication that spoke volumes. Rook wondered if they were debating whether to roast Earth with plasma cannons or just write them off as a lost cause. As they approached the end of the tour, Rook felt the need to push back, to show that humanity wasn't just a collection of nervous jokes and overblown theories. Listen, he said, stopping to face the lead alien. We're not here to cause trouble. We're just trying to survive like everyone else in this damn universe. Our tech is our way of fighting back against a cosmos that seems intent on crushing us. So yeah, maybe we're a little rough around the edges, but we're also resilient as hell. The alien's colors shifted once more, a slow cascade of hues that suggested a hint of understanding. We shall consider your position, Earth Commander. Rook nodded, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a malfunctioning gravity generator. That's all we ask. The delegation turned to leave, their exit as smooth and mysterious as their arrival. Rook watched them go, a mixture of relief and uncertainty battling in his chest. Voss clapped him on the shoulder. Well, that was something. You think they'll come back? Rook shrugged, a tired smile tugging at his lips. Probably. But until then, let's pretend we've got everything under control. As the doors closed behind the aliens, Rook couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. In a universe filled with chaos, humanity's only weapon seemed to be an unyielding sense of humor and a stubborn refusal to give up. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The Ixaliant delegation moved through the research base like they owned the place, all tentacles and shifting colors that looked more like they were running through a cycle of screensavers than any serious form of alien communication. Ambassador Xylox led the pack, a kaleidoscope of arrogance with a voice that echoed like a particularly condescending wind chime. Commander Jareth Rook walked alongside them, trying unsuccessfully to keep the disdain off his face. It was like escorting a bunch of art critics through a kindergarten finger-painting exhibition. He could almost hear their thoughts. Oh, how quaint, these humans with their primitive toys. Rook cast a sideways glance at Dr. Tessa Voss, who looked about as thrilled as a mechanic at a poetry reading. So Tessa, think they'll rate us higher than a 3-star hotel? Voss snorted. More like a roadside motel, and that's being generous. I'm half expecting them to ask for a refund on the way out. The Ixalian entourage paused at a particularly cluttered lab. Tubes and wires tangled together in a way that suggested someone had been trying to recreate spaghetti night with a side of mad science. Dr. Cora Venn, their resident biochemist, was the unfortunate host for this part of the circus. Cora gave the ambassador a tight-lipped smile that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "Welcome to the Biotech lab," she said, with the enthusiasm of a person introducing their mother-in-law to their arrest record. Xylox surveyed the room, his tentacles weaving through the air like he was carving space with disdain. "Primitive," he stated like a king appraising a peasant's hovel. "How do you expect to achieve anything with such rudimentary tools?" Cora shrugged, a gesture that clearly said "screw you" in human body language. "We make do. If you're not pushing the limits of sanity, you're not doing biotech right." Rook chuckled, earning a disapproving glance from Voss. "What? It's true. Half the time, our greatest advances come from someone spilling coffee on the wrong console." Xylox's colors shifted, a spectacle that might have been impressive if it didn't also make Rook want to punch him. "And these accidents, they lead to technological advancement." "Sometimes," Voss admitted with a wry grin. "And sometimes they lead to fire, explosions, and a stern lecture from Dr. Allen." As if summoned by his own bad reputation, Dr. Allen appeared, clipboard in hand and an expression that suggested he'd just stepped in something unpleasant. "What's this about explosions?" "Oh, nothing," Rook said smoothly. "Just the usual Tuesday." "Ah," Allen replied, nodding like a man who just confirmed the sky was blue and water was wet. "Carry on." The aliens slithered past the gene splicer, their interest keen but their expression skeptical. If they'd had noses instead of whatever those tentacle things were, Rook was sure they'd be turned up higher than a snob at a flea market. "Your reluctance to share your advancements suggests you fear us," Xylox observed, his voice dripping with the kind of gotcha smugness that begged for a verbal slapdown. Rook resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "Fear? Please, we're just cautious. You know, like how you wouldn't leave a toddler alone with a set of steak knives." Voss leaned in, her voice a low murmur meant for human ears alone. "They might be worse than toddlers. At least toddlers are predictable in their chaos." The tour continued, each new piece of equipment subjected to the aliens' probing questions and less-than-stellar reviews. Rook could feel the tension mounting, a thick undercurrent beneath the seemingly civil conversation. They were probing, looking for weaknesses, and he was starting to wonder if diplomacy was a euphemism for slow-motion robbery. "So, what do you think, Dr. Venn?" Rook asked as they moved to the next lab. "Can we bore them into submission?" Cora snorted. "If our science doesn't impress them, maybe our tenacity will." "We're nothing if not stubborn." Xylox halted suddenly, turning to face the humans with the air of a creature who'd just discovered a particularly irritating itch. "Your technology, while primitive, shows potential, but we must confirm its safety for all sentient life." "Great," Rook replied. "Next you'll be telling us you need to test it on your own species." "You know, just to be sure." "Precisely," Xylox said, as though the suggestion was reasonable and not completely insane. Rook blinked. "I was kidding." The ambassador's colors indicated he was not. "We demand a demonstration." Voss folded her arms, her tone colder than vacuum. "We're not a sideshow act. If you want a demonstration, buy a ticket like anyone else." The aliens conferred in a swirl of colors that suggested irritation. Rook could practically taste the resentment in the air, thick and bitter as badly brewed coffee. The humans, feeling like they'd inadvertently wandered into a game of interstellar poker, held their breath. The stakes were unclear, but one thing was certain: they had no cards to play. "Very well," Xylox said finally, his voice a grudging acceptance. "We shall observe your operations, but know this: we are not easily deceived." Rook sighed inwardly. "Wouldn't dream of it, Xylox. We're as transparent as a politician's promises." Voss shot him a look that could have melted lead. "Jareth, maybe try not to antagonize the aliens who could turn us into interstellar roadkill. Where's the fun in that?" Rook replied, keeping his voice low. "Besides, if they're gonna blow us up, it's not gonna be because I called them out on their BS." The tour finally reached its conclusion at the control center, where Rook hoped to salvage something from the wreckage of half-truths and thinly veiled threats. The aliens gathered, their presence as unsettling as ever. "So, what did we learn today?" Rook asked, his voice light but his eyes serious. "Other than the fact that we're all a little crazy in our own ways." Xylox, ever the picture of alien superiority, hesitated. "We have much to consider. Your methods are unorthodox." "Understatement of the century," Voss muttered under her breath, barely audible over the hum of machinery. Rook nodded. "Well, hopefully, you'll find it in your hearts, or whatever you use, to see that we're just trying to keep our little piece of the universe from falling apart." The alien delegation murmured among themselves, a churn of colors and sounds that would give any human a migraine. Rook watched, his mind racing through 1,000 contingencies, none of them particularly hopeful. "Commander Rook," Xylox finally said, his voice a reluctant acknowledgement. "Your technology may hold unknown variables, but for now we shall refrain from further action. Consider this a reprieve." Rook nodded, relief mixing with unease. "Thanks, Xylox. We'll keep an eye out for you in the neighborhood." As the aliens prepared to leave, Voss leaned over to Rook, her face a mask of incredulity. "Did we just survive that? Looks like," Rook said, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "For now. But don't worry, I'm sure they'll be back for more." Voss gave him a wry smile. "And next time we might not be so lucky." Rook watched as the Ixaliant delegation departed, their presence lingering like the smell of burnt toast. He knew they hadn't seen the last of these aliens, and the thought was about as comforting as a bed of nails. "Well," Rook said, turning to his team, "we've got work to do. Let's make sure we've got something to show for it next time they drop by. Doctor." Alan, Cora, and Voss nodded, their faces a mix of exhaustion and grim determination. They'd survived one round, but the game was far from over. As Rook walked away from the control center, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of a cliff, and the universe was just waiting for an excuse to give them a shove. But then again, that was life in the cosmic armpit, a constant fight to stay one step ahead of oblivion. And maybe, just maybe, they'd manage to pull it off. With sarcasm as their shield and stubbornness as their sword, humanity would keep fighting, keep surviving, and keep laughing in the face of the void. Because sometimes that's all you could do. If there was one thing Jareth Rook knew how to do, it was smell a rat. And as the Ixaliant delegation slithered out, leaving a trail of disdain and noxious superiority, his senses tingled with that all-too-familiar rodent musk. Or maybe it was just the recycled air. Who could tell on this glorified metal can they called a research base? "Did you notice Xylox's color shift when he asked about the safety protocols, Doctor?" Tessa Voss inquired, her eyes narrowed, as if she were trying to read a particularly stubborn crossword puzzle. "About as subtle as a neon sign in a blackout," Jareth replied, his voice low enough to keep the aliens from hearing through whatever auditory appendages they had hidden under those writhing tentacles. "Doctor," Cora Venn nodded, the lines on her face deepening under the harsh fluorescent lights. "They're up to something. I can feel it in my bones. Or is it the arthritis? Either way, it ain't good." The Ixalians had been poking around like they owned the place, their skepticism as thick as molasses. If Jareth didn't know any better, he'd think they were planning a hostile takeover, but with more tentacles and fewer lawyers. "Alan," Jareth called as he caught sight of the good doctor, who was still nursing his clipboard like it was his firstborn. "Get a team monitoring biosafety protocols. I want every iota of data run through until it screams for mercy." "Doctor," Alan frowned, pushing his glasses up his nose. "You think they'll try something?" Rook shrugged. "Let's just say I wouldn't put it past our guests to leave us a little surprise. Consider it a contingency plan for when shit inevitably hits the fan." The room collectively sighed, an exhale of wariness that could have powered a small wind turbine. The Ixalians might have seen the humans as primitive, but they'd underestimated one very human trait: ingenuity born out of sheer desperation. As the team dispersed to their various tasks, Jareth turned to Voss. "Think we have a plan B somewhere in this mess?" "You mean besides panicking and hoping for a miracle?" Voss asked, arching an eyebrow. "I might have a few ideas, but they involve a lot of duct tape and creative use of a coffee maker." "Sounds like a party," Jareth grinned, but his mind was already shifting gears, running scenarios like a hyperactive hamster on a wheel. He could almost hear the alien gears grinding, plotting some cosmic mischief. Cora Venn was in the Biotech lab, her feet tapping a relentless staccato on the tiles. Her patience, much like the lab's budget, was running on fumes. "If this goes south, I swear, I'll strangle the next tentacled diplomat who slinks through that door. Only if I get to stab them first," Voss replied from her workstation, surrounded by screens displaying complex data sets and a half-eaten sandwich. They were interrupted by a sudden, discordant beep from the main console, a sound that should have only been heard in a worst-case scenario, like finding a snake in your boot or discovering your alien guests have decided to play oops, I did it again with your biosafety protocols. Guys," Alan called, his voice tinged with a justifiable amount of panic. "We've got a breach." "Define breach," Jareth said, his tone deceptively calm as he strode over to the terminal, hoping against hope it was just one of those minor blips that turned out to be a false alarm. "Containment of Lab 3 has been compromised," Alan replied, looking like he'd just watched someone club a baby seal live on TV. "Great," Voss sighed. "The one with the experimental pathogens." "Talk about a bad day," Jareth muttered, rubbing his temples. "Time to put on our hero hats, folks." Jareth glanced at the team, a motley crew of overworked scientists and military personnel, all wearing expressions that could curdle milk. "Let's lock this down before we end up starring in our own disaster movie." "Plan B, then?" Voss asked, already pulling up schematics on her station, fingers flying across the keyboard like they were auditioning for a role in a techno-thriller. "Plan B it is," Jareth confirmed. "Cora, you're on the improvised barricades. Voss, figure out a way to bypass the compromised systems. Alan, you're with me. We'll need to manually shut down Lab 3 before we all get a crash course in respiratory failure." Cora was already on the move, her practical boots thudding against the floor in a rhythm that screamed out of my way or die. Jareth followed, Alan trailing like a reluctant shadow. "Anyone else getting a sense of déjà vu?" Alan asked as they jogged down the corridor, the emergency lights casting everything in a sinister red glow. "Only if you've lived through 100 bad sci-fi flicks," Jareth replied, adrenaline cutting through his veins like the world's worst hangover. They reached the entrance to Lab 3, the air heavy with the faint whiff of something uncomfortably biological. The door was sealed, its digital lock blinking insistently, demanding attention like a spoiled child at a supermarket. "Manual override," Jareth instructed, pointing to a small panel beside the door that looked like it hadn't been touched since the base was first built. "Old school. I like it," Alan said, surprising Jareth by actually managing to crack a smile. "You know, for something designed before the dawn of time." Jareth yanked the panel open, revealing a mess of wires that made his teeth itch just looking at them. Alan leaned in, his fingers nimble despite the stakes. Just like defusing a bomb, right? Except if you screw it up, we're all toast, Jareth replied, and wasn't that the world's biggest understatement? With a breath held longer than was healthy, Alan made the connection, and the door hissed open like an annoyed cat. The room beyond was a tangled jungle of equipment and danger, the lights flickering in a way that screamed enter at your own peril. Okay, so what exactly am I looking at here? Jareth asked, his eyes scanning the room for signs of immediate death. Think of it as Mother Nature's bad day, Alan replied, gesturing to the swirling mass of pathogens contained behind layers of shielding that were now, unfortunately, about as effective as tissue paper in a hurricane. Time to go old-fashioned, Jareth decided, striding to a console at the room's edge. Manual shutdown, then we evac. Voss, you picking this up? Reading you loud and clear, Voss's voice crackled over the comms. I've sealed off the corridors, but we'll need to contain the breach before it spreads. On it, Jareth replied, fingers working the console with the kind of urgency usually reserved for last-minute tax returns. The system was sluggish, fighting him at every step, but finally, with a reluctant whir, the lab's core systems began their shutdown. Jareth could almost hear the collective sigh of relief from every human on the base. Alan, let's move. Now, Jareth ordered, not waiting for a response as he headed for the exit, Alan hot on his heels. Shutdown's holding for now, Voss reported as they cleared the lab. But we've got other problems. The Ixalians are poking around again. Because nothing says welcome like a little light treachery, Jareth grumbled, leading the way back to the control center. Voss, keep an eye on them. Cora, what's your status? Barricades are up, Cora replied, her voice a mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. They'll hold. For a bit, Jareth reached the control room, the tension in the air thick as year-old porridge. Voss looked up from her station, her face a mask of determination. We've managed to isolate the breach to Lab 3, but the Ixalians are definitely up to something. Suggestions? Jareth asked, scanning the room for inspiration or at least a hint that things weren't going to hell in a handbasket. Well, Voss said, leaning back in her chair, we could always invite them to tea and hope they choke on the biscuits. Noted, Jareth replied dryly, turning to face the window that overlooked the base's main corridor. The Ixalians were there, a swirling mass of color and malevolence that made his skin crawl. The aliens paused, seeming to sense his gaze, and Jareth swore the air grew colder, as if someone had just opened a window to the void. You think they know we're onto them? Cora asked, joining him by the window, her voice quiet enough to be conspiratorial. Hard to say, Jareth replied, his eyes never leaving the alien delegation. But I'd put money on them planning their next move. Then it's a good thing we're not entirely defenseless, Voss said, pulling up a schematic of the base. We still have a few tricks up our sleeves. Here's hoping they're not full of holes, Jareth muttered, though he couldn't help but feel a flicker of optimism. After all, if there was one thing humans excelled at besides screwing up, it was finding a way through the mess. And in the cosmic armpit, that was as good a plan as any. Just another day at the office, he thought grimly, watching the Ixalians slither away. And the universe kept on spinning, oblivious to the chaos on this small, insignificant research base. Jareth grinned despite himself. For all its flaws, humanity had one hell of a survival instinct, and right now that might just be enough. The research base hadn't exactly been on Jareth's list of ideal vacation spots, but it was rapidly turning into a dystopian theme park. Chaos world. Watch things go wrong in real time. He mused, swiping a hand through his short, graying hair as if it might somehow brush away the impending catastrophe. The Ixalians were still out there, lurking with the subtlety of a neon sign, and Jareth had an itching sense that things were about to get worse. The base's alarms were still wailing their discontent, making his head throb in rhythm to the flashing emergency lights. It was like the universe's worst disco party, and no one could leave early. Voss was tapping away at her station, the holographic display flickering with the base's schematics. Her eyes darted between screens with the air of someone trying to simultaneously solve a Rubik's Cube and defuse a bomb. Considering the Ixalian's disdain for human technology, Jareth couldn't help but appreciate the irony. "Got any bright ideas, or should I just start writing my will?" he asked, aiming for levity as much as urgency. "Funny you mention that," Voss replied dryly. "I've been thinking about using the base's lower-tech assets, stuff the Ixalians probably think is beneath them, like our ancient security drones." Jareth raised an eyebrow. "Drones? I thought those relics were just collecting dust." "They were," Voss said, her fingers dancing over the keyboard, "until I reprogrammed them. If the aliens try anything, they'll find themselves tangled in a web of outdated but surprisingly effective tech." "Outdated tech for the win," Jareth remarked, managing a grin despite the situation. "And here I thought we were just hoarding junk." Voss smirked, but her amusement was short-lived. "There's a catch. The drones are old and their power sources are as reliable as a used car salesman. We might get one shot, maybe two, before they conk out." "Great," Jareth said, rubbing his chin. "A one-shot wonder, no pressure." Voss shrugged. "That's the spirit. Desperation is our strongest suit, right?" Before they could delve further into tactical improvisation, Cora Venn barged in, her expression as stormy as the emergency lights. "I'm not paranoid," she began without preamble, "but I'm starting to think the Ixalians have a personal vendetta against us." "Join the club," Jareth replied, nodding towards the window. "Nothing says friendly visiting alien species like exploiting a pathogen leak." Dr. Allen, who had been quietly stewing in the background, chimed in. "If they wanted to grab the Biotech, now's their golden opportunity." "Right," Cora said, folding her arms. "Which is why we need a plan that's equally opportunistic." Jareth leaned back, crossing his arms as he considered their options. None were particularly pleasant. "I'm all ears, Doctor. What have you got?" "We use their arrogance against them," Cora said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "I propose we leverage our most rudimentary tech as decoys." Jareth's skepticism was palpable. "And how exactly does that work?" "By rigging some of our more primitive machinery to look like high-value targets," Cora explained. "If the Ixalians are as condescending as they seem, they'll fall for it." "Playing to their ego," Jareth mused. "I like it. Nothing like a bit of good old-fashioned human cunning." "Exactly," Cora said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "It's risky, but if we can make them underestimate the rest of our defenses, we might buy ourselves enough time." "And what do we do in the meantime?" Allen asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Pray to the gods of luck and duct tape," Jareth replied, "and make sure the real valuable tech is secured." "Well, that's comforting," Allen muttered, though his lips curled into a reluctant smile. With a plan, albeit a shaky one, in place, the team got to work. Jareth watched Voss and Allen deploy the drones, their movements precise despite the tension in the air. The ancient machines whirred to life with a sound reminiscent of a 1,000-year-old cat coughing up a hairball, but they were moving, which was a minor miracle in itself. It was a bizarre spectacle, like watching ants try to fend off a bulldozer, but Jareth had faith in the ingenuity of his team. If anyone could make this harebrained scheme work, it was them. The Ixalians, meanwhile, remained an unsettling presence, undulating through the corridors with an air of superiority that only heightened Jareth's resolve. He hadn't come this far just to be outmaneuvered by a bunch of alien squid wannabes. "How's it looking, Voss?" he asked, joining her at the console. "Better than I expected," Voss replied, squinting at the screen. "The drones have created enough of a diversion to give us some breathing room." "Good. Now let's see if we can outfox these galactic prima donnas." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity and adrenaline. Cora's plan, against all odds, was holding. The Ixalians had made several probing maneuvers, each thwarted by the drones and improvised security measures. Yet, Jareth knew it was only a matter of time before the aliens realized they were being deliberately misled. The atmosphere in the control room was tense. A tightrope stretched thin, but there was a determination in the air, a shared willingness to do whatever it took to keep the base and humanity's dignity intact. "We've got movement," Alan called out, his voice sharp. "Looks like they're regrouping." Jareth peered over his shoulder, studying the display as a cluster of Ixalians began a coordinated advance. "Here comes the main event," he muttered. "Time to see if we've really pulled one over on them." The next sequence of events unfolded with the chaotic grace of a bar brawl. The Ixalians surged forward, their colors flickering with intensity as they reached the decoy installations. Jareth watched, heart pounding in sync with the base's alarms, as the aliens fell for the trap, focusing their attention on the wrong targets. It was working. Against all logic, their cobbled-together plan was actually working. Jareth felt the adrenaline rush morph into a euphoric high. "Voss, Alan, keep our systems locked down. Cora, make sure the real tech stays secure. We're not out of the woods yet." The control room was a hive of activity, everyone playing their part in this desperate gamble for survival. The Ixalians, realizing their error, began to retreat, but not before the true extent of the human ingenuity, or as Jareth called it, the art of bullshitting, was revealed. "They're falling back," Voss confirmed, her voice tinged with wonder. "I can't believe it." "Believe it," Jareth said, grinning despite the tension. "And remember, Voss, duct tape is our god now." The room erupted in a mix of exhausted laughter and cheers. The relief was palpable, like a weight lifted off their shoulders. Against the odds, they'd managed to stave off the alien threat, at least for now. Jareth took a moment to savor the victory, however temporary. "Let's not get too comfortable," he cautioned, his tone sobering. "They'll be back and we need to be ready." "We'll be ready," Cora said firmly, her eyes meeting his with a confidence that was both reassuring and infectious. Jareth nodded. "That's the spirit. We've got a long road ahead, but if today's proved anything, it's that we're not just flying blind." The team dispersed to tend to their tasks, each step accompanied by a renewed sense of purpose. Jareth lingered at the window, gazing out at the stars, his thoughts a mix of pride and resignation. "Well, universe," he murmured, "you tried to screw us over, but we're still here. And for as long as we are, we'll keep fighting." Beside him, Voss joined his silent vigil, her presence a steady reminder that in the cosmic game of chess, humans might be outmatched, but they were far from outwitted. "You know," she said softly, "I think we might actually be onto something." Jareth chuckled, a sound more relief than amusement. "Yeah, we just might be. Now let's see if we can keep it up." With the stars as his witness, Jareth Rook allowed himself a moment of hope. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but they'd faced worse. And as long as they had each other, they had a fighting chance. And in the grim darkness of space, that was the only beacon he needed. Jareth Rook was fairly certain he had experienced hangovers more pleasant than the current state of the base. The alarms were singing their eternal dirge, and the flashing lights made him feel like he was trapped inside a malfunctioning carnival ride. If he wasn't trying to save humanity's sorry backside, he might have considered turning it all off just to get some peace and quiet. "Voss, if I don't die today, remind me to find whoever designed these alarms, and personally thank them with my fist," he grumbled, trying to focus on the holographic display that was more temperamental than a soap opera diva. Voss, bless her masochistic soul, was still tapping away at her station, her fingers a caffeine-fueled blur. "I'll add it to the list right after survive impending doom. Always a bright side, isn't there?" Jareth said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Any chance you've come up with a miracle to add to our repertoire of outdated genius?" "Working on it," she replied with a grim smile. "But unless you can pull a rabbit out of your hat, we might have to settle for just surviving this mess." Jareth watched as the Ixalians started to gain ground, like an expanding oil slick of technicolor malice. He had to give them credit. They were damn determined for a bunch of tentacled egomaniacs. "Cora, Alan, what's the status on our little decoys?" Jareth called out, turning to where Dr. Cora Venn and Dr. Alan were hunched over their consoles. Alan looked up, his face a mask of frustration. Holding for now, but they are probing harder. It's like they've got a vendetta against anything with a circuit. Whatever gave you that idea? Cora retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Maybe it's the fact that they're trying to turn our base into their new beachfront property. Jareth grinned despite everything. We'll just have to crash their housewarming party. But first, we need to ensure they don't get past our defenses. The problem was, their defenses were about as reassuring as a paper shield against a flamethrower. The Ixalians were relentless, their tentacles slithering through the narrow corridors of the base, absorbing information with the indifference of a vacuum cleaner. They were slowly learning, adapting, and that was the last thing Jareth needed. Voss, any chance those drones of Ior's can pull another miracle? Jareth asked, the desperation seeping into his voice like a reluctant guest who refused to leave. I'll see what I can do, but don't expect a fireworks show, Voss replied, her fingers never pausing in their dance. I'm milking these ancient relics for all they're worth. Jareth's mind raced, trying to outthink an opponent that was probably 3 steps ahead. He could feel the morale in the room sinking, like a stone tossed into a very deep, very dark well. They were running out of time, out of options, and it was beginning to feel like the universe had it out for them. As if on cue, Ambassador Xylox chose that moment to make his unwelcome presence known, gliding into the room with the self-assured arrogance of someone who just knew he was the smartest being in 100 light years. Commander Rook, Xylox intoned, his voice like a condescending lullaby. Your efforts are admirable but ultimately futile. Surrender would be the logical choice. Jareth resisted the urge to punch the alien in what he assumed was its face. Xylox, if I wanted your advice, I'd have asked for it. Now, unless you've come to deliver a pizza, I suggest you float back to your delegation. Xylox's colors shifted to something resembling mild amusement. Your tenacity is amusing, Commander, but logic prevails over chaos. Funny, Jareth shot back. I always thought chaos had a better sense of humor. Ignoring the ambassador's disdain, Jareth turned back to his team. All right, folks, time to double down on this insanity. Cora, Alan, see if you can rig something, anything, that can slow them down. Cora nodded, her eyes gleaming with a mix of desperation and determination. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve, but it's not going to be pretty. Pretty went out the window along with sanity and a decent night's sleep, Alan quipped, already diving back into his work. The mood was tense, the air thick with the kind of anxiety that could only be sliced with a chainsaw. Yet Jareth could sense the camaraderie, the shared madness that bound them together in this cosmic joke of a situation. Then the lights flickered, just a brief shudder but enough to send a chill down Jareth's spine. What now? Voss muttered, staring at her console as if it had personally insulted her. Power fluctuations, Cora said, her voice edged with concern. The Ixalians might be trying to disrupt our energy grid. Fantastic, Jareth said, throwing his hands up in mock celebration. Just what we needed, an electrical saboteur. On the bright side, if they shut us down, we won't have to listen to these damn alarms, Voss pointed out, her lips twitching with dark humor. Every cloud, right? Jareth said, trying to muster a smile. But it was hard to keep the morale up when the universe seemed hell-bent on kicking them while they were down. As they scrambled to reinforce their dwindling defenses, Jareth couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Not with the Ixalians, they were predictably despicable, but within his own ranks. It was a gut feeling, the kind that had saved his skin more than once, and it didn't take long for his suspicions to be confirmed. As if choreographed by some malicious playwright, a sudden explosion rocked the base, sending everyone sprawling. The holographic display fizzled out, plunging the room into semi-darkness. What the hell was that? Alan shouted over the din, scrambling to his feet with the grace of a newborn deer. Internal sabotage, Cora said grimly, her eyes scanning the room for signs of treachery. Someone's playing both sides, Jareth swore under his breath. Of course, their darkest ire would come with a side of betrayal. He should have known. All right, people, eyes open. We've got a snake in our midst. The team regrouped, shaken but not defeated. The explosion had compromised their defenses, and Jareth knew they were running out of time. As he surveyed the scene, his mind raced with possibilities. Who would do this? Who would sell them out to the Ixalians? Voss, we need to identify the mole. Check the log, see if there's anything suspicious, Jareth ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. Voss nodded, her expression one of fierce concentration. On it. If there's a rat, I'll find it. While Voss worked her magic, Jareth moved to the center of the room, trying to project an air of calm authority he didn't quite feel. Listen up. We've been dealt a bad hand, but we're not folding. We need to lock down the vital systems, keep them from turning us into their personal science project. Cora and Alan nodded, their determination a testament to the human spirit, or what was left of it anyway. As they set to work, Jareth couldn't help but feel a grudging admiration for his team. They were exhausted, outmatched, and probably 2 steps away from a mental breakdown, but they were still fighting. Jareth, Voss called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. I've found something. There's a discrepancy in the security logs. Looks like someone's been tampering with the system from inside. Who? Jareth asked, tension coiling in his gut. Voss hesitated, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. It's Alan's access codes. All eyes turned to Alan, who looked as shocked as everyone else. What? No, that's not possible. I've been here the whole time. Maybe you have, but your codes weren't, Voss said, her voice carrying the weight of accusation. Jareth felt the atmosphere shift, the sense of betrayal spreading like a virus. Alan's loyalty had never been in question, until now. Alan, we need answers, and fast. Alan shook his head, his expression one of disbelief and hurt. I swear I didn't do it. Someone must have used my codes to cover their tracks. Convenient, Cora muttered, her skepticism evident. Enough, Jareth interjected, raising a hand to quell the rising storm. We don't have time for a witch hunt. Alan, whether you're guilty or not, we need to secure the base. If you've got a plan, now's the time. Alan nodded, though the look in his eyes spoke of a wounded pride. I can reroute the power, give us a bit more time. But it's a temporary fix. I'll take temporary over nothing, Jareth said, feeling the weight of their predicament settle over him like a shroud. As Alan set to work, Jareth turned to Voss. Keep digging. We need to find the real saboteur. Voss nodded, her focus unwavering despite the mounting tension. I'll crack this, I promise. Jareth hoped she was right, because if they couldn't root out the traitor, the Ixalians wouldn't need to conquer them. The humans would implode all on their own. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness, each one marked by the oppressive weight of uncertainty. Jareth watched as his team fought to keep the base operational, their desperation a palpable force in the room. They were battered, blooded, but not broken. Not yet. Power stabilizing, Alan reported, though his relief was tinged with caution. We've bought ourselves a little breathing room. Good, Jareth said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Let's make the most of it. As they continued to work, Jareth couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of a precipice, one wrong move away from disaster. But as long as there was a chance, however slim, they would fight. The base was groaning under the strain, the Ixaliant presence a constant gnawing at their defenses. Jareth knew they were running out of time, out of options, but there was a stubborn part of him that refused to give up, because surrender was not an option, not while there was still a flicker of hope. In the grim darkness of space, hope was a dangerous thing. It could lead to delusion, to false promises. But in that moment, with his team rallying around him, Jareth chose to embrace it. Because sometimes, hope was all you had left when the universe conspired against you. And if today had taught him anything, it was that humans were nothing if not stubbornly resilient, even when the odds were impossible. Let's show the universe what we're made of, Jareth murmured, his resolve hardening like steel. Beside him, Voss glanced up, her eyes meeting his with a fierce determination. Damn right, she said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. And so they continued against all odds against the looming threat, with nothing more than sheer will and a dash of dark humor to see them through. Because in the end, that was the human way. The universe had a knack for timing, or more accurately, a knack for maliciously bad timing. As Jareth watched the chaos unfold around him, he couldn't help but marvel at how elegantly everything was falling apart. You'd almost think it was scripted. "All right, everyone, let's try not to implode," Jareth said, trying desperately to sound like he had a handle on this cosmic clown show. "Cora, can you get those security drones back in line? Or at least in a formation that won't get us killed?" Cora looked up from her jury-rigged control panel, eyes glinting with the kind of manic energy that only comes from facing certain doom with nowhere to run. "Those relics are about as reliable as a politician's promise, but I'll see if I can coax them into some semblance of cooperation." "Great. Treat them like you would your mother-in-law." With fear and respect, Jareth quipped, hoping humor would keep morale from nosediving entirely into hell. Dr. Voss was neck-deep in data, her fingers flying over her console like a concert pianist on a caffeine high. "Jareth, if I can reroute the mainframe's processing power, I might be able to tweak the decoys to emit a frequency that'll mess with the Ixaliant's senses." "Mess with their senses, huh?" Alan said, his eyes sparking with sudden interest. "Kind of like the way this base messes with our sense of sanity." "Exactly," Voss replied with a tight smile. "If insanity is contagious, let's make sure it spreads to them, Doctor." "Then what's your take?" Jareth asked, shifting his attention to the good doctor who had a penchant for sarcasm that rivaled his own. "I say we give them a taste of good old-fashioned human ingenuity," Ven said, her lips curling into a smirk. "Their tech might be advanced, but they underestimate the power of duct tape and desperation." Jareth nodded, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the impending doom. "All right then, let's turn this dystopian death trap into a showcase of our finest DIY engineering, Doctor." Alan moved over to help Voss, while Cora clambered over a pile of spare parts that looked like the aftermath of a robot yard sale. "I've got a plan," she announced. "It's half crazy, half brilliant, just like me on a good day. We need to set up a distraction, something so annoying they can't ignore it." Jareth raised an eyebrow. "Annoying, you say?" "Yeah, like a mosquito at 3 in the morning," Cora shot back, her grin almost feral. "Perfect. Let's annoy them into submission." And so the ragtag team of misfits got to work. They were a symphony of sarcasm and ingenuity, a testament to the human spirit, or at least to human stubbornness. Amidst the cacophony of alarms and the flickering of half-broken lights, they began to weave a tangled web of desperate defenses. "Cora, I need you to monitor the power levels. We can't afford another blackout," Jareth said as he helped Alan with a complicated array of wires that looked more like spaghetti than a high-tech solution. "Watch the power levels," she says, Cora muttered to herself. "Like we're not already hanging by a thread." In the biotech lab, Voss was hacking away at the decoy controls, her eyes dancing with a mix of concentration and amusement. "If I can route the frequencies right, we'll make their sensors overload like kids on a sugar high. Just make sure they don't crash harder than my last relationship," Alan said, trying to keep the mood light, even as frustration gnawed at the edges of his sanity. "Trust me," Voss replied, not taking her eyes off the console. "If this works, we'll give them a brain freeze they won't soon forget." Jareth watched his team move with a chaotic grace, each member playing their part in this mad symphony. It was a beautiful disaster, and somehow, against all odds, they were pulling it off. "Jareth, we've got incoming," Ven called out, her tone a mixture of urgency and grim determination. "The Ixaliants are ramping up their attacks. Let them come," Jareth said, his voice carrying a weight of defiance. "We've got surprises of our own." The base shuddered as another blast rocked its foundations. Dust rained down from the ceiling, a gritty reminder of just how precarious their situation was. "Cora, any luck with those drones?" Jareth asked, bracing himself against the nearest console. "They're about as stable as a drunk on a unicycle, but they are operational," Cora replied, her fingers dancing over the controls with surprising dexterity. "Let's see if they can't make a nuisance of themselves." Jareth grinned despite himself. "That's the spirit. Let's make those Ixalians regret ever thinking we were easy targets." As the first wave of drones buzzed to life, Jareth couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They were battered, bruised, and probably one step away from insanity, but they were far from beaten. "Jareth, we're ready to activate the decoys," Voss called out, her voice tinged with anticipation. "Do it," Jareth said, the word carrying the weight of their collective hopes and fears. The decoys surged online, their frequencies weaving an invisible net that stretched across the base. It was a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice, but in this game of cosmic poker they had nothing left to lose. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The alarms blared, the lights flickered, and the air was thick with tension. Then slowly but surely, the Ixalian advance began to falter. "Holy hell, it's actually working," Alan said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. "Of course it is," Voss replied with a wry smile. "Never underestimate the power of a desperate human, or a really good bluff," Jareth added, feeling the tide beginning to shift in their favor. The Ixalians were on the back foot, their forces disoriented by the unexpected assault on their senses. It was a small victory, a fleeting moment of triumph, but it was enough to reignite the fire in their hearts. "Don't get cocky," Ven warned, though her eyes were alight with a newfound hope. "They're not beaten yet." "True," Jareth conceded, his grin unwavering. "But now they know we're not just going to roll over and play dead." The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of wills and wits. But slowly, steadily, the humans began to push back. It was a testament to their resilience, a reminder that sometimes the smallest spark could light the darkest night. "All right, people, let's keep up the pressure," Jareth said, his voice carrying a newfound confidence. "We've got them on the ropes, now let's finish this." They were a motley crew, a band of misfits and outcasts, but in that moment they were unstoppable. Against the odds, against the universe's cruel sense of humor, they were fighting back. And winning. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Jareth dared to hope. Because while the universe might have its plans, humans had a way of rewriting the script. "Let's show them what humans are made of," Cora said, her voice carrying over the din. "Stupidity and caffeine," Alan quipped, a grin breaking through his grim facade. "Close," Jareth replied, a gleam in his eye. "Stubbornness and spite." The base groaned and creaked, but it held firm. It was a testament to their ingenuity, their refusal to give in. As the Ixalians faltered, the humans pressed their advantage, each step a defiant march against the tide of inevitability. And so, against all odds, against the universe itself, they fought on. In the grim darkness of space, they found strength in each other, in their shared madness, in the hope that refused to die. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But in that moment, as Jareth surveyed the battlefield with a wry smile, he knew one thing for certain. The universe might deal them a bad hand, but they were the masters of their own fate. And damn it if they weren't going to make the most of it. "Well, if that doesn't scream 'come at me, bro,' I don't know what does," Jareth remarked dryly as the Ixalians regrouped outside the base. Their tentacled forms were a kaleidoscope of colors, rippling with a fever pitch of frustration, and something that might have been grudging respect. "These guys have more persistence than a telemarketer during dinner," Cora quipped, barely looking up from her console where she was coaxing the security drones into a formation that vaguely resembled something useful. "Doctor." Voss was hunched over the Biotech lab's terminal, her fingers a blur as she manipulated the decoy frequencies. "Let's see how they like a dose of our best techno-wizardry," she said, her voice laced with the kind of optimism you only find in the truly desperate. "Think they'll appreciate the dedication to craftsmanship?" Alan asked, his sarcasm hiding the nervous energy that jittered through him like a live wire. Jareth grinned, though the expression felt like a foreign object on his face. Oh, I'm sure they'll write us a lovely review. The base shuddered again, not from any new attack but from the weight of too many desperate hopes pinned on aging technology and cobbled together ingenuity. Yet somehow, they were still standing. "We're out of time," Ven announced, her voice a grim reminder that the universe didn't wait around for anyone to get their act together. "Right," Jareth said, clapping his hands together. "Let's show these squids how we throw a party." Cora hit a switch, and the drones took to the air with a clattering that could generously be described as controlled chaos. They buzzed out of the hangar like a swarm of angry mechanical bees, converging on the Ixalians with all the subtlety of a rock concert in a library. "Who knew tin cans could be so menacing?" Alan mused, watching the drones zigzag through the air. "Menacing. I was going for mildly irritating," Cora corrected, her eyes never leaving the screen. "But I'll take it." Meanwhile, Voss was putting the finishing touches on the decoy system. "If they had noses, this would be the equivalent of pepper spray," she said, a wicked grin spreading across her face as she pressed the final command. The decoys went live, broadcasting a cocktail of signals designed to scramble the Ixalian senses. The alien advance hesitated, their once fluid movements now jerky and uncertain. "Looks like we've short-circuited their brain-to-tentacle coordination," Jareth observed, not hiding his satisfaction. "Finally, something as confused as I feel," Ven muttered, but the edge in her voice was softening. In response to the sensory overload, the Ixalians began to retreat, their vibrant colors dimming as they withdrew from the field. They still communicated in their own cryptic way, but the message was clear. They had underestimated their opponents. "Well, that wasn't so bad," Alan said, running a hand through his hair as if to smooth down nerves as much as anything else. "Speak for yourself," Voss retorted, cracking her knuckles. "I feel like I've just run a marathon in my brain." Jareth chuckled, though he felt the exhaustion creeping into his bones. "Imagine how they feel. They came for a quick victory and instead got a crash course in human bullheadedness." The alarms, which had been wailing incessantly, finally started to peter out, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. "So, what now?" Cora asked, turning to face Jareth, the manic adrenaline fading from her eyes and leaving behind the kind of tired resolve that only survives on caffeine and sheer willpower. "Now," Jareth echoed, looking at the ragtag team that somehow managed to pull off a miracle. "Now we see if they decide to come back for round 2 or if they'll go lick their wounds somewhere far, far away." "Do you think they learned their lesson?" Alan asked, the question hanging in the air like the aftermath of a bad joke. Jareth shrugged. "Hard to say. Aliens with egos bigger than their sense of caution. They'll probably try again. But next time, maybe they'll bring a better plan than just overwhelming us with shiny lights and slimy limbs." Voss leaned back, finally allowing herself a breath. "Well, we've still got the element of surprise. They might think twice before underestimating us again. If they have any sense," Ven added, "they'll realize that getting this close to winning and still losing is a special kind of humiliation." "Humiliated aliens," Jareth said, shaking his head. "Can't say I ever thought I'd be involved in that particular chapter of history." "So, what's the plan?" Cora asked, her irrepressible energy returning in a less frantic but no less potent form. "Sit here and wait for them to make the next move." "More or less," Jareth admitted. "We use this time to patch up what we can, prepare for the next wave, and maybe, just maybe, get a little rest." The team dispersed to their respective duties, the immediate crisis over but the specter of another looming large in their minds. They knew better than to celebrate prematurely, but the knowledge that they'd survived to fight another day was enough to keep them going. As the base finally settled into an uneasy calm, Jareth allowed himself a moment of reflection. They'd faced down an alien threat with little more than duct tape and determination, and they'd won. For now, at least. "Funny how the universe works, isn't it?" Voss said, noticing his thoughtful expression. Jareth nodded, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, funny in a your pants just caught fire kind of way. Well, maybe next time we'll be the ones lighting the matches, Voss replied, her eyes glimmering with a mixture of challenge and hope. Jareth laughed, the sound echoing eerily in the now quiet bass. I like the sound of that. Let's make sure they know that when they mess with humans, they're playing with fire. Or at least with people who really, really like fire, Cora chimed in, still tinkering with the drone controls. With renewed purpose, they set about their tasks, knowing that they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to prove that humans were more than just the sum of their flaws. They were stubborn, resourceful, and most importantly, unpredictable. As long as they had those traits, they'd always have a chance, no matter what the universe threw their way. And for now, that was enough. So, what's next on the agenda? Ven asked, joining them by the control center. Hopefully not another alien invasion, Alan said, though his tone suggested he wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. Whatever comes next, we'll face it the same way we always do, Jareth said confidently. With a mix of terror and bad jokes, the base felt different now, as if the victory had changed more than just their odds of survival. It had reminded them of their own strength, their own capability to adapt and overcome even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Hey, Jareth, Cora called out, a mischievous glint in her eyes. What is it, Cora? Think we'll get medals for this? Jareth chuckled, shaking his head. If we do, I hope they're made of something useful like chocolate or caffeine. The team shared a laugh, the warmth of camaraderie doing more to stave off the cold of space than any heating system ever could. And as they turned back to their stations, ready to face whatever came their way, there was a shared understanding. Whatever happened next, they were in it together. In the grim darkness of space, sometimes all you needed was a friend to share a laugh with and an enemy to outwit. They might not have been the universe's most advanced species, but they were without a doubt the most stubborn. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. For now, it was time to rest, regroup, and prepare for the next challenge. Because if there was one thing they all knew, it was that the universe wasn't done with them yet. All right, people, Jareth said, clapping his hands and rubbing them together. Let's get back to work. With that, they returned to the task of fortifying their defenses and preparing for whatever came next. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to face it, and if it dared to mess with them again, well, they'd just have to give it hell. The Ixalians had retreated, and not a moment too soon. The base had taken a beating that would make it jealous of a punching bag. Jareth Rook stood amidst the aftermath, surveying the chaos with the grim satisfaction of a janitor who's just spotted the last empty fast food wrapper in an otherwise trashed auditorium. The alarms had finally given up their torturous wailing, leaving the base cloaked in an almost serene silence, except for the occasional sputter from an overworked console. Look at that, Jareth said, gesturing at the flickering holographic display that seemed to be having an identity crisis, unsure whether it was supposed to show tactical data or last week's football scores. A victory's as good as a fresh coat of paint, right, Doctor? Tessa Voss, still glued to her station like a caffeine-fueled barnacle, glanced up with a smirk. If by fresh paint you mean barely held together by wishful thinking and duct tape, then sure. Cora Venn, cradling a cup of something that had the dubious color of engine grease, leaned back with a sigh. Hey, let's not knock the duct tape. It's the unsung hero of this operation. You're not wrong, Alan added, his jittery hands finally finding calm as they clutched a mug of equally questionable liquid. I mean, I'm not saying we're the universe's most advanced species, but I don't see the Ixalians making stuff stick together with household items. True, Voss said, cracking her knuckles with a wince. They might have superior tech, but I doubt they understand the concept of making do, or improvisation, Jareth chimed in, which happens to be our national pastime. The group shared a bout of laughter, the kind that bubbles up after narrowly escaping disaster and realizing you're still standing. It was a moment of levity in a universe that seemed hell-bent on throwing them curveballs the size of small moons. So, Cora said, tapping her mug with a finger, what's the plan? We can't exactly stick a do not disturb sign on the base. Jareth rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of command settle back onto his shoulders like an ill-fitting coat. We regroup, rebuild, and make sure next time they come knocking, we're ready to slam the door in their faces. And if they use the doorbell, Alan quipped, ever the master of gallows humor. Then we answer it with something explosive, Jareth replied, a grin tugging at his lips. Voss stretched, the tension in her muscles almost audible. I'll keep working on the decoy systems. If we can confuse them long enough, maybe they'll start doubting whether this planet is worth the trouble. Cora nodded. And I'll see if there's any life left in those drones. With any luck, we might coax them into actually hitting something next time. The base was a symphony of groans and clanks as the team set about their tasks. It wasn't much, but it was what they had. And right now, what they had was all that stood between them and an encore performance of Squid Invasion, the musical. Jareth made his way to the command center, stepping over piles of debris with the practiced ease of someone who could navigate chaos in his sleep. He found Ven there, staring at a console as if it owed her money. "Ven," he called, drawing her out of her reverie. She turned, her eyes reflecting the weariness that only a marathon of crisis management could produce. "Hey, boss, you think they'll be back?" He shrugged, always the picture of nonchalance. "If they do, they'll find we've added a few new surprises to the welcoming committee. Surprises like more duct tape. And maybe some glitter bombs," he joked, though the idea had a certain allure. "Nothing says screw you quite like a face full of sparkles." Ven chuckled, shaking her head. "You know, I used to think dealing with aliens would be more glamorous." "What, this isn't everything you dreamed of?" Jareth asked, feigning shock. "All the flashing lights, the constant threat of imminent destruction, it's like a never-ending festival." "Yeah, a festival where the music is just alarm bells and the rides are death traps," Ven replied, rolling her eyes. "Hey, some people pay good money for that kind of adrenaline rush," Jareth said deadpan. "We're just giving them the bargain version." Ven snorted, the sound echoing in the quiet command center. "Well, if this whole saving humanity gig doesn't pan out, we could always sell tickets. Discounts for anyone not trying to kill us," Jareth agreed. "That should narrow down the guest list. Think we'll get any takers?" "I've got my doubts, but then again, the universe does love a good surprise." They fell into a comfortable silence, both knowing the reprieve was temporary. The universe might have a sick sense of humor, but it was nothing if not predictable in its chaos. "You really think we can hold them off?" Ven asked eventually, her voice soft but steady. Jareth considered the question, weighing it against the bleak reality they faced. "We've got grit, Ven. We're like weeds, hard to kill and even harder to get rid of." "Not exactly poetic, but I see your point." "Poetry's overrated," Jareth replied, watching the holographic display blink uncertainly. "Survival, now that's something to get excited about." Ven nodded, her expression resolute. "Then let's give them a good show." Jareth left the command center feeling a little lighter. The team was tired, probably beyond the point of exhaustion, but they still had fight left in them. It was a fragile kind of optimism, but just enough to keep them moving forward. As he wandered the halls, he passed by the Biotech lab where Voss was hard at work. Her station was a cluttered mess of wires, screens, and devices that seemed more alchemy than science. "How's it going in here?" Jareth asked, leaning against the doorframe. "About as well as you'd expect," Voss said without looking up. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve, though none of them involve actual magic." "Too bad," Jareth replied with a mock sigh. "We could use a good sorcerer right about now." "Well, my wand's in the shop, so you'll have to make do with good old-fashioned science," Voss replied, finally sparing him a glance. "Besides, I'm pretty sure the Ixalians don't believe in magic, which is precisely why we need to use it against them." Jareth grinned, pushing off the doorframe. "Keep up the good work, Voss. You're our secret weapon." She waved him off with a dismissive hand but couldn't hide the small smile that tugged at her lips. He continued down the corridors, feeling the base slowly returning to a semblance of order. The repairs would take time, but they were on the right track. More importantly, morale was creeping upward. bolstered by their unexpected victory. He found Alan in the mess hall, staring blankly at a tray of food that looked like it had been sourced from the bottom of the galaxy's least appetizing ocean. "Lost your appetite?" Jareth asked, plopping down across from him. "If you can call this food," Alan replied, poking at the unidentifiable mass with a fork that had seen better days. "I think it's trying to crawl away. Can't blame it," Jareth said. "If I had a chance to escape, I'd take it too." Alan chuckled, though the sound was more resigned than amused. "You think they'll give us a break, even just a little one?" "If history's anything to go by, probably not," Jareth admitted. "But hey, we seem to thrive on adversity." "Maybe it's our natural habitat. Speak for yourself," Alan grumbled, finally stabbing a small portion of the meal. "I'd kill for a week where the biggest crisis is a coffee shortage." "Ah, the simple pleasures," Jareth said, his tone wistful. "One day, my friend, one day." They sat in silence, each lost in thoughts best left unexamined for too long. In a world where survival was never guaranteed, the smallest moments of peace were treasures. As Jareth finished his rounds, the realization hit him with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. They'd done it. Despite every odd stacked against them, despite the universe's apparent vendetta, they'd survived. Together. The base still needed work, and the threat of another alien assault loomed like a cloud refusing to disperse. But for now, they'd won. And that was worth celebrating, even if only with the smallest nod to the absurdity of their existence. "Hey, Rook," Cora called from across the hallway, her voice breaking through his reverie. "What'll you do when this is all over?" Jareth paused, considering the question with all the seriousness it deserved. "Probably find a nice beach somewhere to retire on. Maybe open a bar." "A bar?" Cora echoed, incredulous. "Yeah," Jareth said, smiling. "Someplace quiet where the only thing I have to worry about is running out of rum." "Sounds nice," Cora admitted, her own gaze drifting as if she could already see the waves lapping at the shore. "Until then," Jareth added, "we keep fighting for each other, for our future." "Sounds like a plan," Cora replied, her voice infused with newfound determination. And so they set about the task of rebuilding, armed with nothing more than their wits and an unyielding resolve. They were tired, bruised, and all too aware of their own mortality, but they'd faced the worst the universe had thrown at them and come out the other side. Jareth knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The Ixalians would be back, perhaps with more numbers, better strategies, and shinier toys. But for now, the base was quiet, the team was alive, and the horizon stretched before them filled with a possibility that seemed just a little brighter. In the grim darkness of their corner of space, they'd found something to hold onto, the stubborn, irrepressible spirit of humanity. It was messy, complicated, and wonderfully resilient. Just like them. "All right, people," Jareth said, clapping his hands once more, the sound echoing like a promise. "Let's get back to work." And with that they returned to their tasks, ready for whatever the universe had in store. They might not have all the answers, but they had each other, and sometimes that was enough.